Protests against U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital spilled over Saturday into Israel, following 3 days of violence between Israeli soldiers and Palestinians in the West Bank, Gaza and East Jerusalem. To really understand the Middle East, subscribe to Haaretz. In the early evening on Saturday, medics reported that a bus traveling to Tel Aviv was hit with rocks as it passed through Wadi Ara, a valley of mostly Arab communities in northern Israel. At least 3 Jewish Israelis were lightly hurt in the incident and the bus windshield was destroyed. Bedouin in Israel protest Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. December 9, 2017. Eliyahu Hershkovitz. Around 200 protesters at the Arara junction in Wadi Ara blocked the road and threw stones at passing vehicles, including at a photojournalist's motorcycle. A bus driver sustained light injuries from broken glass. Police arrested 2 youth and an adult from Arara who are suspected of taking part in throwing rocks. We've got more newsletters we think you'll find interesting. Click here. Please try again later. Meanwhile, additional protests were reported throughout Israel, including in Meidal Shams, along the border with Syria in the north, in the Bedouin city of Rahat in southern Israel, in Taiba, Kfar Kara, and the German colony in Haifa. Members of Knesset from the Joint Arab List participated in some of these protests. At least 140 Palestinians were hurt in clashes in East Jerusalem and the West Bank on Saturday. Palestinians claimed 4 Israeli officers were hurt during clashes in East Jerusalem, the Israeli police said. Meanwhile, over 20 were hurt in the Gaza Strip, local medical sources said. Violent protests broke out Saturday in over 20 sites in the West Bank, including Tul Karm and Rachel's tomb in Bethlehem, with approximately 600 Palestinians burning tires and throwing rocks as well as Molotov cocktails at Israel Defense Forces and Border Police. Greater than Jerusalem for Dummies. Why the world doesn't recognize it as Israel's capital. Jerusalem for Dummies, Part 2. What the Palestinians want. The IDF has responded using dispersion tactics and arrested 1 individual. According to the Red Crescent, 18 Palestinians were wounded by rubber bullets and over 107 from tear gas. About 450 Palestinians protested in over 5 different locations along the Gaza border. They were also burning tires and throwing rocks at IDF forces on Saturday. Israeli forces reportedly responded by firing rubber bullets, and, according to Palestinians, with live rounds as well. Protests were held in Ramallah, Hebron and the Israeli Bedouin city of Rahat on Saturday, as well as in Jerusalem. Page 2. When President Donald Trump announced Wednesday that the United States is recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, he didn't address whether the Americans intend to recognize Israeli sovereignty over all of Jerusalem and its responsibility for all of its residents, including the more than 300,000 Palestinians who neither view themselves as Israeli and are not treated as such by either the city or state. To really understand the Middle East, subscribe to Haaretz. When the United Nations voted to divide British Mandatory Palestine in 1948, it intended 2 states to emerge: Israel and an Arab-Palestinian state. Jerusalem, with its mixed, Jewish-Arab population and an essential place in the history and belief systems of Christians, Muslims and Jews the world over, was not to belong to either state. Rather, the UN proposed that the city be administered by an international regime, until the time when Israelis and Palestinians could agree on an equitable and permanent arrangement for sharing it. The Jews accepted the partition plan and the Arab world did not, and a war ensued. At its conclusion, the State of Israel was in possession of West Jerusalem, while Jordan occupied and annexed East Jerusalem, including the Old City, as well as the West Bank. The Jordanians destroyed much of the Old City's Jewish quarter and denied Jews access to the Western Wall. The Palestinians had no state. Greater than Jerusalem for Dummies. Part 1. Why the world doesn't recognize it as Israel's capital. Greater than a Jewish and Arab woman talking on cell phones in Jerusalem, June 2016. Some 324,000 of the city's 865,000 residents are Arab. Olivier Fitoussi. During the 19 years it ruled the West Bank and East Jerusalem, an annexation recognized only by the United Kingdom, Pakistan and Iraq, Jordan contended with a nascent but growing Palestinian nationalist movement. It was a fanatic Palestinian nationalist who killed Jordan's King Abdullah in 1951, a period when the monarch was holding unofficial peace talks with the Israelis. Get all updates. Follow us on Facebook. At the end of the Six-Day War in 1967, it was Israel that occupied the West Bank and East Jerusalem as well as Sinai, Gaza and the Golan Heights. It removed the fence that split Jerusalem in two, and expanded the city's borders by 200%. To Jerusalem's 198,000 Jewish residents were added 69,000 Arabs, who were automatically granted permanent residency status and offered the opportunity to become Israeli citizens. In 2015, according to the Central Bureau of Statistics, the overall population of Jerusalem was 865,000, of whom 324,000, some 38%, were Arabs, while most of the rest were Jews. With the blue identity cards that come with permanent residency, Palestinians in East Jerusalem are free to move about Israel freely, and to work and study where they want. But collectively, Jerusalem's Arab residents never came to terms with Israeli rule. Very few requested citizenship, and for the past half-century most have refused to participate in the city's political life, even though they are eligible to vote in municipal elections. Ephemeral existence, perhaps because they are not represented in City Hall. Jerusalem's Arabs suffer from inferior municipal services, roads, schools, law enforcement and garbage collection, for example, all lag far behind those found in adjacent Jewish neighborhoods. Residents of Arab neighborhoods rarely receive permits for new construction, so nearly all the building that takes place is deemed illegal and at risk of being demolished by the municipality. And permanent residency itself can be ephemeral. The state can revoke it, not only if the resident takes part in political violence, but also if he/she leaves the country, even for studies, for a period the authorities deem excessive. Between 1967 and 2014, some 14,000 East Jerusalemites suffered that fate. Israel did not only annex the neighborhoods that traditionally made up East Jerusalem in 1967. It also incorporated Palestinian neighborhoods and villages that had never been part of Greater Jerusalem in the past. Between the patchwork of Arab sections, not only in the east but also to the north and south of West Jerusalem, it built giant new neighborhoods intended only for Jews, Gilo and Pisgat Zeev, for example. By design, it moved many government offices into the Arab East, and also, especially in recent years, it has allowed Jewish extremists to move into more central neighborhoods, such as the Old City's Muslim Quarter and Silwan, which were until then exclusively Arab. The Hebrew University's Drive. Hillel Cohen is an expert on Israeli-Palestinian affairs and the author of such books as The Rise and Fall of Arab Jerusalem, Palestinian Politics and the City Since 1967. He explains that the Israeli reality of continual growth of the Jewish population in Palestinian areas, both in Jerusalem and in the West Bank, causes a situation in which the division of Jerusalem becomes harder and harder. An Arab man walking through the old city of Jerusalem after Palestinians called a strike in protest at U.S. President Donald Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as the Israeli capital, December 7, 2017. Emil Salman, he continues, this also pertains to large Jewish neighborhoods that have been built in East Jerusalem, with which Israel intentionally caused fragmentation of the space. Israeli politicians like to talk about Jerusalem being the eternal, undivided capital of Israel. In reality, though, they treat its Palestinians as if they were in the city on probation. In turn, by boycotting the political game, the Palestinians have limited legitimate alternatives for demanding their fair share. Not only can individual Arabs find themselves denied residency in Jerusalem. When Israel built its West Bank security barrier following the start of the Second Intifada in 2000, it left certain neighborhoods that were within the municipal boundaries on the wrong side of the wall. And some Israeli politicians are now proposing removing other troublesome neighborhoods from the jurisdiction of the Jerusalem municipality, most recently Jerusalem Affairs Minister Zeev Elkin and Education Minister Naftali Bennett, who would like to reverse the 1967 decision to graft the Arab neighborhoods of Kafraqab and the Shofet refugee camp onto the city. Trump's proposal doesn't acknowledge the dual nature of Jerusalem and the status of its Arab residents. It also ignores the international community's consistent refusal to unilaterally recognize Israeli sovereignty over any part of Jerusalem until Israel and the Palestinians come to an agreement on sharing the city and the land. Jerusalem experts are not surprised by the Palestinians' strong reaction to Trump's decision. The city is home to hundreds of thousands of Arabs, and the urban center to which hundreds of thousands more are drawn from surrounding parts of the West Bank. But Jerusalem is also a sacred city to all Muslims, location of the Haram al-Sharif known as Temple Mount to Jews, where the Al-Aqsa Mosque stands. A very fragile balance prevails there, and an intense campaign by Israel's Islamic movement has convinced many Israeli Arabs that Al-Aqsa is in danger, from Israelis who want to destroy the shrines on the mount and rebuild the temple. Clouds gathering over the Dome of the Rock, located on the Al-Aqsa compound in Jerusalem's Old City, November 6, 2017. Ammar Awad Reuters Arab residents of East Jerusalem in front of a Mifal Happeas National Lottery stand in Jerusalem, March 1968. Fritz Kohenko. There is no reason to believe that the Palestinians will relent on maintaining control of Haram al-Sharif, nor that they will forego having the capital of any Palestinian state created anywhere but in Arab East Jerusalem. Interviewed on Israeli radio before Trump's announcement, former Palestinian Authority Minister Ziad Abu Zayed explained calmly but decisively that, without Jerusalem as its capital, there won't be a Palestinian state and there won't be a two-state solution. Palestinian negotiator and spokesperson Saeb Erekat made the same point in an emotional statement he released shortly after Trump finished his address. The fate of Jerusalem will not be determined by the speech of the President of the United States of America, but by the Palestinian Arab people in Jerusalem and everywhere in the land of Palestine, he declared. Like Abu Zayed, he added that, there will be no Palestinian state without Jerusalem and its capital. The only alternative that will remain, Abu Zayed insists, is of a single state made up of Jews and Arabs together. Even if Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu say they remain committed to the two-state solution. End of days. The good version. A man walking past trash at the entrance to the Shofet refugee camp. Although Israel annexed the camp after the Six-Day War in 1967, it is now on the wrong side of the West Bank separation barrier. Talai Meir Ramon, a senior researcher at the Jerusalem Institute for Policy Research, says the official Palestinian position has evolved over the years, and that today PLO negotiators stipulate that while East Jerusalem has to be the Palestinian capital, they are ready to recognize West Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. That doesn't mean Palestinians envision a fence or wall running through the city, dividing it physically, as was the case between 1949 and 1967. They say something else. Ramon notes, and it's important that it has to be an open city, that they don't want to divide it. A shared capital may like an end-of-days vision, the good kind, not an apocalyptic one, but there are other cities that have succeeded in making it work, says Ramon. Author of the recently published Hebrew-language book, Residents, Not Citizens: Israeli Policy Toward the Arabs in East Jerusalem. He points to the small, shared urban space of Happur and Tornio, which is divided between Finland and Sweden, and says that at the Jerusalem Institute they are studying the lessons to be learned from such places. However, Cohen says even the assumption that Palestinian negotiators would be willing to cede West Jerusalem to Israel, if their sovereignty in the East was recognized, ignores the fact that Palestinians have claims in the west of the city, too. A Palestinian woman whose house has been occupied by Jewish settlers arguing with Israelis who came to celebrate Jerusalem Day in front of her disputed house in East Jerusalem, May 2010. AFP, Baca, Kataman, Talbia, Malka, all of these were Palestinian areas before 1948. Cohen says, and all of them produced refugees. Today, these are all desirable, upscale Jewish neighborhoods in South Jerusalem. Cohen adds that during the peace talks in Oslo in 1991, Palestinian political leader Faisal Husseini objected to Israeli control of Silwan, the Arab neighborhood, just south of the Old City, where both the City of David Archaeological Park and several groups of Jewish settlers have made inroads in recent decades. According to Cohen, Husseini argued to Israelis that if you insist on Silwan because there were Jews there before 1948, then we will demand Baca because we were there before 1948. If you don't accept 1948, if you demand on having what you had before then we too cannot accept you in Baca or Kataman. For the Jews, the sacred link to Jerusalem goes back to the presence of the Holy Temple there, beginning some 3,000 years ago. But for Muslims, the conquest of Jerusalem in 637 is of great importance to them. And starting in the 11th century, when Saladin reconquered Jerusalem from the Crusaders, Muslims in the city began to regard themselves as guardians of the holy places, explains Ramon. There are good reasons as well as bad ones why the Jerusalem question has defied resolution. It may be tempting to treat the conundrum as one that can be solved by the clean swipe of a sword through the Gordian knot, but that won't make the problems disappear.